Hey there, everybody. Alec here, and we did it! You did it! I did it? We all did it! Yay! By the time you're watching this, the year 2020 is either close to or already over, and it would be remiss of me, I think, to start this video without commenting on just what a wild year 2020 has been. Now, call it a cliche, but 2020 has been a whirlwind for a lot of us. It's a tough thing to call for me personally because while I think 2020 certainly isn't the worst year I've ever lived, it's definitely in the top 5. It's pretty high up there regardless. Apart from my personal experience though, this has definitely been a tough year for a lot of people. And when you add up just the giant laundry list of things that this past 12 months has decided to throw at us, not to mention the global significant event that YouTube doesn't like us saying by name that's been affecting our day-to-day lives for the past 9 to 10 months. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. Now at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, hang on a second, did I click on the right video? And honestly, I don't blame you. But the point I'm trying to make is that our day-to-day lives, now more than ever, bring with them a newfound sense of fatigue. And for me personally, whenever I'm feeling emotionally drained or whatnot, the escape that I often turn to is video games. And video games have done nothing but thrive over the past 12 months. And frankly, I think the reasons for that are pretty obvious. We're spending a lot more time at home, and as a result, a lot more people are starting to take up some new hobbies. And some of those hobbies might include video games. And while I realize that not everyone uses the outlet of video games in the same way that I do, or maybe even you do, I think it's very much worth saying how happy and how grateful I am to be able to say that we've had these experiences to get lost in the first place. So I think now is as good a time as any to give a huge wealth of applause and a big shout out to all of the various game developers and studios across the industry for managing to launch projects in the middle of this. And I think that's really great. So while on the surface this may seem like just another top 10 video games of the year list, right? These games that we're about to list have not only been my favorite games of the year, but have also played such a crucial role in keeping myself, and I'm sure many others, sane in what would otherwise be a truly, truly chaotic year. So, with all that said, and with all that out of the way, why don't we just go ahead and cut to the chase, shall we? Starting with number 10. Other than being a testament to how much I suck at traditional board games, Clubhouse Games is likely one of the best deals you will find on the Switch currently. As the name implies, this is a collection of 51 tabletop-style games, ranging from things like chess to even air hockey. Now, for as many games as there are, though, it's natural that not every game featured is a hit. I have yet to find much enjoyment myself out of games like Dominoes or Hare and Hound, just to count a few by name. On the other hand, though, there are a handful of games in this bunch that I have put many hours into, some of those being things like Chess, President, Yacht Dice, and 4 in a Row. Another great thing about this game is the fact that, again, as the name implies, this is a collection of games from all around the world, so it can even serve as a gateway or a good way of introducing new players to games that they otherwise would have had little or no opportunity to be exposed to. I can personally attest to this as I've since discovered and eventually fell in love with a game called Hanafuda, and as far as I know, Hanafuda is a game that's not really too well known here in the States, but I've personally grown to love it, and I'd wager that it's probably one of my most played games out of this entire collection. I even managed to seek out a deck of real-life Nintendo-themed Hanafuda cards featured from Club Nintendo from back in the day. And all that is thanks to this group of games. Simply put, Clubhouse Games is a fantastic deal for anyone who's a fan of board games, and a really, really cool way to chill out and have a few casual games with your friends every now and then. Though it may not be as present in the public's general consciousness as it was earlier this year, Fall Guys lands on this list as one of the best casual multiplayer games of the year for me. Somewhere between a Battle Royale and a Mario Party minigame marathon, Fall Guys is one of the most accessible games out there. You're a colorful bean trying to be the last one standing. What's more simple than that? For a game like this, a lot of its success is going to come from the overall strength of the minigames themselves. And while not everyone that's included is great, I personally hate Fall Mountain despite being the most advertised. This isn't to say that it's enough to bring down the overall experience. As a matter of fact, outside of what the base game has to offer, Fall Guys has been consistently introducing new costumes, modes, and events to keep players playing. So, even if I didn't really like some of its debut minigames, there's certainly a healthy stream of content to warrant checking this game out, if you haven't already, that is. Miles Morales is a game I wasn't expecting to play this year, mainly because I wasn't expecting to be able to pick up a PS5 this year, which was a whole adventure in itself. Console hunting aside though, Spider-Man Miles Morales does a great job of being the reason to own a PS5 right now. Understandably, there's a debate over whether or not picking up consoles this early in their lifespan is worth it. However, if you're going to be buying into the next generation of PlayStation, this is a game I'd consider a must-own. Now, I'm gonna be honest here, and I'm no stranger to admitting it, but I'm not really a huge fan of superheroes in general. I generally don't like the movies spanning the MCU, and while DC can give us something good every once in a while, I'm overall not too impressed with their offerings either. However, after leaving the theater for the premiere of Into the Spider-Verse that my friends invited me to a few years ago, I was floored. There's just something about the character of Miles Morales that really drew me in, and I've yet to place my finger on exactly why that is. But I knew as soon as I saw the brief announcement trailer for this game during Sony's PS5 State of Play that I needed to play this, and I'm glad that I did. Now, I know this game is not technically a PS5 exclusive, as it's also available on PS4, but let me tell you, if it's possible, I highly recommend playing this game on a PS5. There were so many moments during my playthrough of the story that just left me motionless as I sat there admiring just how good this game looks, thanks in large to the new generation's addition of hardware-accelerated ray tracing. For those unfamiliar, ray tracing is basically higher fidelity renditions of light, shadows, and reflections in a scene. So for example, when Miles is running up a building in New York, you see his reflection on the windows, and the same goes for puddles of water on the ground, etc., etc. On paper though, it doesn't sound all that interesting, but that, along with the generally higher frame rate on PS5, make this a must-play on the newer generation. Outside of general prettiness, the actual game of Miles Morales is where a lot of my enjoyment actually comes from. Now, I'm gonna be honest and say that the story here is largely forgettable. It plays out very predictably, and there wasn't really a point where I felt like the tensions or the stakes were all that high, but that is precisely where my complaints with this game end, as everything else included is simply fantastic. There's something to be said about how spectacularly this game controls. Swinging through the streets of New York feels amazing. The music, just like the film before it, perfectly match what's going on screen and melds into Miles' world seamlessly. The campaign, outside of the story, is wonderful because you get to see all of the relationships Miles makes and even strengthens over the course of the game. And all of this is going without even talking about the combat, which is amazing, by the way. In the interest of keeping my thoughts on this game short, I'll just say this. If you have, or are currently planning on picking up a PS5 at some point in the future, play this game. Have you ever wanted to play a game that's part Assassin's Creed, part Breath of the Wild, part Mystery Science Theater 3000, and part Fable? Well, good news, because Assassin's Creed of the Wild Theater Fable 3000 is here to answer that call. Though, let's just agree to call it Immortals Phoenix Rising. If you've ever watched any of my videos or streams about this game, you'll likely have heard one or more of those comparisons already, and that's because, well, they're true. Playing through this game evokes, in my mind, so many similarities with past media that it's almost hard to keep count. But it's what the game does with its influences that sets it apart from being just another Breath of the Wild clone that a lot of people write it off to be. Immortals takes place in the Golden Isle, a fantasy-like world in which the spirits of the gods and monsters still roam the lands to tell and share their stories directly with the player character, Phoenix, in a very comedic way. Right from the start, this game is not afraid to throw expectations to the wayside in favor of slapstick comedy and a bunch of awkward one-liners. In short, this is a game that doesn't really take itself too seriously, and as a result, never comes across too heavy-handed. As I was playing through the campaign on Twitch, which, by the way, if you haven't followed me there, feel free to stop the video here and go drop me a follow. We currently stream about 5 days a week and are always looking to make new connections. Anyway, as I was playing this game on Twitch, I had a few viewers who are bigger into Greek mythology than I am telling me that this game takes very few creative liberties, meaning that the stories and characters that you're encountering are, for the most part, historically accurate. I've talked about this game at length on the channel before, so I'll just wrap up this little mini review with this. If you enjoyed Breath of the Wild, have played an Assassin's Creed game, or are just looking for a good excuse to brush up on your Greek mythology, specifically through the lens of a video game, then Immortals Fenyx Rising is a game definitely worth checking out. Near the midpoint on our list is a game that probably lived the shortest in what I'll call hype cycle out of any title on this list, and that game is Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Officially recognized as a successor and prequel to the original Breath of the Wild, Age of Calamity seeks to answer perhaps the biggest question from Breath of the Wild, that being, what happened before the Calamity? As an avid Zelda fan myself, the idea of getting more content in the Breath of the Wild universe excited me more than I expected, as that is a very good question, since when you think about it, all of the story exposition and dialogue in Breath of the Wild, most of it happens in the past tense, as it mostly has to do with events before and leading up to the eventual attack of Calamity Ganon. Now, I'm not really going to get into spoilers on this one, as I think the game's cinematics do a way better job of that than I could ever do, but let me be clear when I say, if you're a fan of Breath of the Wild or Zelda as a whole, and you're on the fence about this game, it's certainly worth diving into. I've seen many people pass judgment on this game already before even playing it, saying things like, you know, I'm not super into Hyrule Warriors, or it's just another Warriors-style game. And while that's technically true, yes, the gameplay is very typical Warriors game fare, but this particular game does things a little bit differently than past Warriors titles, a fact that I think largely comes from the involvement of longtime Zelda series director Eiji Onuma and his team. It was made clear to us from the start that this game's development was worked on in large part thanks to the Zelda team's cooperation. A large portion of the initial reveal was dedicated to that. But all of this in mind, you might be wondering, what does this actually get you? Well, in short, this game gives you a 15 to 20-ish hour campaign, if you exclude all of the side quests and 100%ing it, that features some traditional Warrior-style gameplay and a whole lot of story, music, and cinematics. All of it goes together to make this particular Warriors outing feel so uniquely Zelda that if it weren't for the fact that it was marketed as a Hyrule Warriors game, I'm willing to bet that most people would mistake it for what we have come to recognize as a main series title. Going back to the point I made earlier though, if you like Zelda, and the Breath of the Wild universe is one that interests you, this game goes above and beyond by giving you a compelling, fully voice-acted, and cinematic story that's absolutely worth experiencing, for sure. Unlike every other game on this list, Persona 5 Royal is unique in that it's the only game on here that I actually haven't beaten yet. Seriously, it's that good. For years now, I've gotten endless requests to play this game, and now I can finally understand why. I won't dive into spoilers or anything like that, nor do I want to, but what I can say is, at least until the point that I am in the game, I'm really enjoying it. I'm honestly not the best when it comes to playing full-on anime RPGs like this, as more often than not, I'm the type that picks up a game, puts it down, then comes back a few months later, and in the frustration and forgetting what's going on in the story, they either restart entirely or just don't come back to it. None of that is present here in my current playthrough of Royal. Nearly every day since I got the game last month, I wake up looking forward to seeing what else this wacky game has to throw at me. I realize I'm only so far in, but so far I've enjoyed every boss fight, every piece of music, every locale, and every character this game has brought to the table. And I'm currently just dying for more. If you played this game already, feel free to let me know your thoughts, spoiler-free of course, in the comments below, and also feel free to tell me who the best girl is and why it is on Calamity. And with that, let's move on. Super Mario 3D All-Stars featuring Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and, my personal favorite, Super Mario Galaxy. That's a lot of Mario. This is a collection that was long rumored throughout almost the entirety of 2020, and while I myself am not the type to really put too much stake into rumors, yeah, I can't say I didn't buy in. The idea of putting all of Mario's greatest adventures into a fully HD remastered collection for the Switch to celebrate Mario's 35th anniversary? Sign me up! I mentioned just a moment ago that Galaxy is my personal favorite Mario game, and I've been solo campaigning for years now to get this game remastered on Switch, and to see it finally here and in full HD makes my heart so happy. Apart from the fact that I love each and every game in this collection, I think another part of this release that I've really been enjoying too is getting to see others experiencing some of these games for the first time too. For whatever reasons there may be, whether someone was too young, didn't own a GameCube, or just didn't have an interest at the time, getting real first impressions on some of these games this many years after their release has made me almost, if not just as happy as being able to play them again on Switch. I don't think I need to sit down and review these games as their legacy basically speaks for them. Apart from Breath of the Wild and Mario Kart, I think Super Mario 3D All-Stars is the latest on the list of must-own titles for the Switch. If you've played them before and are looking to experience them again, or if you're someone looking to play these games for the very first time, Super Mario 3D All-Stars is easily the new definitive way to do so. Gaming in 2020 was a year of firsts for me, and no example is bigger than that of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I've been a fan of video games nearly all my life, and admittedly, there are certain series and franchises that have managed to slip away from me over the years, whether it be because I didn't own the console they were available on, or whatever other reason there may be. Final Fantasy is a franchise I've always known about, and oddly enough, is a series I've had plenty of exposure to. Some of the most iconic video game songs of all time come from this very series, and to top it all off, I already loved certain tracks from this very game, including One Winged Angel, Aerith's theme, and that ever so iconic prelude. All of this to say, I've really had no excuse not having played the original Final Fantasy VII before playing Remake, so I can reasonably say that I probably wasn't as enchanted as someone who's been loving this game since 1997. Be that as it may, this game still managed to leave a huge impression and a very special place in my heart. I went into this game already aware of the legacy and prestige that it's rightfully earned over the last few decades since release, and just how special it was for so many people seeing this world reimagined through a modern lens. And while I can't tell you how it compares to the original or anything like that, what I can tell you is that as a first-time player of not only Final Fantasy VII, but Final Fantasy at large, this game has set a new expectation that I have every reason to believe it will live up to moving forward. Right from the very start of the game, during the initial bombing mission on the Maka reactor, this game just radiates with production value. The cinematics in this game look like scenes from a movie, oozing with realism and believability that really immerses you into the world of Midgar. The performances from every character are top tier, so much so that it almost forces you to believe that these are real people with real struggles. And of course, the music is naturally fantastic as well, featuring some of Nobuo Uematsu's original arrangements now being performed by a full-on orchestra, rather than what most might mistakenly refer to as chiptunes. The battles in this game are amazing as well, perfectly blending the series' turn-based origins and modern live-action combat. I could go on and on, as nearly every system that this game uses, whether they be combat, materia, graphics, not to mention the cool dynamic music feature that changes the instrumentation of the music in the background depending on what you as the player are doing in real time, you name it, and this game has it in spades. Final Fantasy VII Remake sets a new standard for the industry as to what a remake should look like. Every line of dialogue, piece of music, and environment remastered and remade to more align with modern gaming. I can't wait to see personally what this game, like the impact this game will have on future remake projects across the industry. And if they're anything like FF7's rendition of it, then boy, we are in for some awesome titles for years to come. for what it's worth, I think now is as good a time as any to dive into the world of Final Fantasy VII. So, you have one of the most celebrated games ever, and you're developing a game that's not only a sequel to that, but also made it as one of the most anticipated games of 2020. It's only natural that there's going to be plenty of discussion after the fact, and discussion there has been. It's still hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that this game came out nearly 6 months ago because of how much I feel like this game has been talked about this year, spiking again recently thanks to the Game Awards. I think this game does a remarkably great job at continuing what was otherwise a perfect story in the original Last of Us. I personally feel like it's a little hard to discuss this game without talking spoilers, so this is your one warning. If you haven't played the original Last of Us yet, or The Last of Us 2, skip to this timestamp on screen. That way you don't have to listen to all of my yapping on the story. Okay? Okay. So, for the uninitiated, The Last of Us 1 is a story about a zombie outbreak, and a guy named Joel. Joel is a man who at the very beginning of the game has a huge attachment to the idea of family. You can tell from the way he talks to his daughter, this is a man who loves this little girl and would do anything for her. It's through the eyes of his only daughter, Sarah, that the game starts things off, and to say this opening sequence is perfect would still be an understatement to me. I'm not going to sit here and analyze why that is, as there are plenty of other videos on this platform that do so already. Trust me, I've watched them. Essentially though, around 15 minutes of the game, Sarah tragically dies in Joel's arms in a scene that rips my heart out every time I watch it. Seriously, it's so good. If you haven't yet, please go watch it. It's fantastic, and it's the power of storytelling in video games. After this point though, the rest of the story becomes one of Joel and how he, a 40-something-year-old man, chooses to navigate through the emotions of the loss of his daughter and the idea of trying to learn to accept a new one, Ellie. At the very beginning of their adventure, Joel is very cold to her and basically treats her the way most of us probably saw her at the beginning of the game, an escort mission, a means to an end. Joel just wants to get the job done and be done with it. However, over the course of the game, Joel slowly but surely starts warming up to Ellie. We see that despite her rough exterior, on the inside there's a little girl who is just as lost and as scared as everyone else is. She has dreams, aspirations, she's human. Anyway, after the hijinks ensue, at the end of the game, Joel decides to make some morally gray decisions that may or may not have led to the possible doom of humanity, and at the very end of the game, Joel chooses to lie to Ellie, basically saying to the audience that he would rather the rest of the world die than have someone take away what he likely sees as his daughter now. Now, depending on who you ask, you may or may not agree with his actions here, but either way you slice it, it's easy to understand that the decisions he had made had good intentions. The question then becomes, was it worth it? Again, that's a question of who you ask, and that brings us into The Last of Us Part 2. This game, much like its predecessor, gives us a pretty big shock of adrenaline in its beginning hours by brutally and unceremoniously killing Joel. Honestly, I feel like this is something that we should have all seen coming. I mean, I certainly did. And while it's easy to have felt this moment coming, it doesn't make it any easier to have to watch or experience. On the one hand, this is a guy we know has the power to do good. We've seen it firsthand. And on the other, Abby isn't necessarily wrong in her feelings either. From here, I think, is where the game starts to touch on some themes, some parts of humanity that were largely absent from the original, and it begins asking players some harder-to-face questions about morality. Is Ellie just in her actions as she rampages through hordes of people in her quest to kill Abby and exact revenge for Joel's death? Most people might say yes because, well, we know her, and we know Joel. They're good people, and Abby is clearly the bad guy because she killed Joel, the guy who is hard for us to see as anything else but good. Sure, he has made some mistakes, but that doesn't mean he has to die for it. The game takes this feeling even further by not only watching Abby kill Joel, but making us play through about 12 or so hours of the game from Abby's perspective. You know, the person that killed Joel. Now, personally, I think that runtime is a bit too long for my taste, but by making us play through the game in her eyes, you see that she's really not all that evil. She's got friends that care about her, a base full of people she's trying to protect, and a dog named Bear. After all this, it begs the question, who's really the bad guy here? Again, much like the first game, this largely depends on who you ask, and all this leads up to a very tense final act where Abby and Ellie face off against each other in a final showdown that's just so gnarly. And after the credits rolled on this game, I can't say I looked at nearly anyone in this cast the same as I did before I started playing. That's just the story, though, and honestly, I could go on and on and on about it, and I'm going to go ahead and say this right now. If there's anything else that you want to talk about further regarding the story for this game, feel free to leave a comment down below, as I would love to dive into it. But for the sake of time, I can't sit here and talk about my thoughts in full, because this is a big game. Anyway, aside from the story, though, everything else from the stunningly beautiful visuals, incredible motion capture and voice performances, the spectacular soundtrack, once again scored by Gustavo Santaolalla, I hope I pronounced his name right, all of it contributes to this game becoming a technical achievement in its field. So, regardless of what you may think of its story or its character motivations, there's no denying that this game is certainly worthy of praise. And if you have a PS4, or even a PS5 for that matter, I would definitely recommend this game. It is clearly one of the biggest, and in my opinion, one of the best of the year. When I think of all the defining moments of gaming in 2020, none stick out to me as much as Animal Crossing New Horizons. Now, I think it's pretty commonly accepted at this point that this game could not have come out at a better time. Releasing on the 20th of March, this game debuted at a time when most of us were in the early phases of lockdown in most of the world. Naturally, having all this newfound time to be spent at home, most people were searching for something new and an easy and fun way to connect with people that we had suddenly grown so distant from. And for a lot of people, that answer was Animal Crossing. This game has been selling like hotcakes all year, and even now, as of writing this, remains in the number 2 spot of the highest selling games on the eShop, and for the record, it hasn't left since March, so this game, you could say, is pretty popular. To be frank, though, there's not really a whole lot of game to talk about with New Horizons. You basically arrive on an island with a few other neighbors, then slowly but surely you build things up, attract new islanders to move in, and eventually craft what can slowly amount to be your own personally crafted island paradise. And that is exactly the kind of escape most of us needed in 2020. If this game had released when it had initially planned to, that being in late 2019, I don't know if it would have had the same cultural impact that it has had this year. I mean, over the course of 2020, we've seen things like talk shows, music videos, heck, even political campaigns all take place in the world of Animal Crossing. And in a year that's given us nothing but crap at every turn, it was nice having our own little virtual island getaway that we could escape to. And sometimes, even a moment of reprieve like New Horizons can be the best medicine. All right, and that's about it. Thank you so much for sticking around up until this point in the video. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel to see more of my videos in 2021. Seriously, it really does help the channel grow. And all right, you guys, that pretty much brings us to the end of the video. So once again, thank you so much for watching up until this point. But before I go, I wanted to pass this question over to you guys. What are some of your favorite games from this past year, and why? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below, as I'd love to discuss with you guys. So, I guess with all that said, and without further ado, there's only one thing left to say before we take off, and that is, of course, as always, I'm alecandstuff. I hope you have a wonderful new year, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Here's to an awesome 2021.